So I'm actually sitting in a house and I'm working on mapping out the way I'm going to do the port work on this cylinder. It's for the Jonsered 2149. We're putting a cheap aftermarket 346 top end on it, importing it and all that stuff. And I'm kind of showing you pieces along the way. I'm not really getting super detailed, but I'm kind of showing you bits and pieces. So I'm kind of mapping it out here, kind of getting an idea of what I'm going to do. And I figured I'd go ahead and bring you in and kind of show you what the plan is. Alrighty? All right, you can kind of see there. I'm kind of drawing some lines and doing some stuff. I'm going to kind of explain to you what I'm doing there. That is what I'm planning on doing for the exhaust. She's at 107 after all the machine work. And I'm taking it up. Well, that line is scribed in at 98 degrees if I make that line disappear. So that's kind of what I'm thinking about doing. I'm probably going to end up going just a tad bit higher though. We'll see. Not 100% on that yet. That decision, I should say. The transfers, the upper transfers are sitting at 125 degrees after the machine work. And the intake is opening at 78 degrees after the machine work. Now, you see these, you're probably seeing more lines there than what you're accustomed to seeing. All that is, that's the piston. And if you look at the other side there, yep, we had a little mishap. I had to get a new piston. There's a new one coming. I was taking the clutch off. And I used my impact kind of drill looking thing. And when I kicked that sucker on, it just spun that around, smacked it, and that's the connecting rod that hit it and knocked it off of there. So yeah, I'm replacing the piston. It's a pain in the butt because I customized the top end of it. So I'm going to have to make sure I redo it and do it as close to exact as possible. It probably won't be, but if you've seen the process, it's. I mean, you'll know that I'll be able to duplicate it. It'll take me a minute, But yeah, moving on from that little mishap, I'm just basically drawing a picture of the bottom of the skirt at the intake port and how it looks and all that stuff. And some ideas. It gives me ideas. So you see that little square shape there at the side? That's this little square shape here at the side of the piston. I just wanted to draw all this stuff out, get me an idea of what she's going to look like in there. You know what I mean? So basically, here, let me get this tiny screwdriver here, give you a little pointer. One thing I discovered is if I want to port match this, I don't need to do anything here. I'm talking port match the lowers. I don't need to do anything here, but this side could come way back to like here in order to do a port match. So I may do that because, well, I noticed that for a port match, it lines up pretty much at the side here. So I could go this far if I want to get those lowers port matched on this side. So I'm probably going to do a pretty decent chunk of grinding here and get it good and port matched. But whenever I do it, I'm going to grind it at an angle. I'm going to grind it to where it's like ground here, but then angled in kind of like this. Okay. And the reason, because if it's ground in like this shape, it should help to direct flow and get it to wrap around the intake side. And that's the plan, is to get this thing to flow really super well. So you can do what you want to the exhaust, but the transfers do most of the work with getting rid of the exhaust. Most of that work comes from the transfers, and the better you get them to flow, and the better you get that flow to circulate around the back side here, the better it'll push it out from the combustion chamber and out the exhaust. You know what I mean? So that's kind of what I got in mind here. Now for this side here, it's the port match is pretty good. So this little divider, I'll remove material from it, but I'm only going to remove it from this side. I'm not going to touch this side, so I'm going to pull this side over and kind of shape it to where just helps promote the flow in that general direction. Now I am planning on putting in bridge ports. So if you look here, there's not a whole lot of space between the intake and the upper transfer to try to put in a finger port. So I'm actually planning on bridge porting it. I was actually planning on doing that anyway, so it's not a big deal, but there really isn't much space there to do a finger. Part of the reason is because you need a certain distance between like the intake and the finger and all this stuff. You need to have some material there to basically seal off the port. I don't like having ports bleed into each other. So I like to leave a decent amount of space between everything just to keep it from wanting to bleed from one to the other. I don't want air to try to change directions is basically what I'm trying to say. Because if it changes direction, it doesn't like to do that, and it's like it's lost energy whenever it starts to change direction. So you know what I mean? It's like, say I'm trying to compress the air into the crankcase as the piston comes down. I don't want that compressed air to bleed from this bridge port and try to push back out the intake. Does that make sense? I don't want that compressed air to bleed by the small amount of material that would be here and start pushing air out the intake. It doesn't take much to get a good seal, but it's just something I want to keep in mind. You know what I mean? That, and you see how I kind of got this drawn out. So this line up here is basically where the skirt of the piston is going to lay whenever she's at top dead center. And this is how the skirt of the piston will form at bottom dead center. So these are basically the lines, or I shouldn't say, this is where the skirt of the piston will lay whenever it closes off the intake port. And I just want to keep in mind with that, because if I start to go wider, I want to make sure I don't go so wide that I'm cutting past this line. You know what I mean? Because that, like say you have a piston with a windowed piston, this won't look like this. It'll come more straight up and down this line. And if you bring your intake port out past that line, you effectively lose or actually increase a lot of your intake time, because that's open. That's technically open into your intake port from the edge of the window through your intake port, essentially ruining your intake timing. So this is just one of those things I try to do to keep track of where the skirt of the piston is. This is what I screwed up on that 395. I went too wide, and because it was a skirted piston, I essentially took the intake port so wide that the skirt of the piston wasn't able to close off the port. So she was traveling the whole way to bottom dead center, effectively being open. And it was really interfering with that 395, so I had to replace the cylinder. That, and it was so wide that the skirt of the piston, right through here, was snagging on the intake port down here at the bottom. It was trying to snag on it. So, yeah. 2 reasons there why I had to replace that cylinder on the 395. I screwed up, It was a windowed piston, and I ported it like it was a non-windowed piston, and I made a mistake. We make them, but it's one of the reasons you want to keep track of this stuff, Now, I think you got a pretty good idea of what I'm going to do, except for maybe the way I'm going to lay out the bridge ports. So the bridge ports going to come from here and I'm going to drag it down. But you see, this is that little square shape on the side of the piston. I'm going to feed it from this area. So basically I'm planning on coming up with this line here and then kind of curve it around and across and into the upper. I'm probably going to come across right at the corner, this lower corner, and just continue that shape on over, kind of in a weird angle right here. And then this line here, if I make it disappear, that's 118 degrees. So it'll probably have kind of a weird shape up here through this corner of this upper transfer, and then it'll come down and kind of do a little hook and straight down here, and then this whole area is effectively going to be open, so I could run the other side from anywhere here. And I'm probably going to drag it from all the way over here and kind of do a little hook with it and up and into about this area of the upper right here. And basically you're going to, it'll have a weird shape to it up through here. If you can imagine kind of cutting through here and up and over into like a point, and then back down and through there. That's what the Bridgeport's going to end up looking like though. Something like that. Probably not going to touch this upper here. So probably not going to touch it really. Maybe raise it a couple of degrees because it is at 125. But there's not enough space here at this bridge to really push it over this way at all. I may do one of Charlie Briscoe's tricks and raise it up and put a little finger, like an overlapping finger out and over this one. I may do that because I've seen him do that very successfully. So maybe I will cut a little overlapping finger out there. I'm thinking about doing it. I've never tried it before, and it's a trick he's been doing, so I don't know. I might just go ahead and do that. Do a little copying of Charlie Briscoe. He figured out that that can work, but I mean, you're pushing it. You're really pushing it. You could end up peeling something off, or if you go too wide, you hang a ring, you know. But I'm thinking about trying it on this cylinder. That's going to be tricky for me, though, because I can't see where's a squat without a freaking magnifying glass. Whenever I'm grinding, I have to do it with, like, taking pictures and zoom it so I can see what I'm doing. My eyes just aren't what they used to be, so you know what I mean? We'll see, though. We'll see how she turns out. I still got to polish out that combustion chamber cut, and I'm not worried about doing that until I get the new piston, just in case you're wondering about that. I haven't done that because I'm waiting to get the new piston all set up, because I'll probably have to touch that combustion chamber just to make sure everything's mashed up good, and then I'll go ahead and polish it out once I get that new piston. So in case you're wondering why I haven't done that, that's why. Just want to make sure she's mashed up good to the new piston. Now the exhaust ports, I'm just planning on taking it a little wider and a little taller. Basically the same shape you see there on the exhaust, just imagine it going a little bit wider and a little bit taller. Not a whole lot more than that. I believe it came up at like 47 degrees of crankcase compression, which is higher than what I was expecting. And I don't want to change things too drastically. I find the more drastic you change the numbers on things, the more difficult they can be to run. And the volume of your crankcase will affect what you want to do, like changing of your numbers. So the changes I'm planning on doing is probably going to take me down to about 40 pounds of compression. So I'm going to lose, 40 degrees of crankcase compression. So I'm going to lose a little bit, right? I'm fine with going to 40. It's just, if these are already running at 47 degrees and I'm going to take it to 40, there's a loss in the crankcase compression there. Do I really want to go much further than that? I think what I'm going to do is set it up at that and see how she runs. I mean, I can always go back into it later. Um, the intake timing is currently at 78, but I do plan on getting in there and cleaning that mess up right there. And I bet you by the time I'm done, she's going to be sitting at about 80. And I'm fine with that, you know? So that's kind of the plan. That's the plan of what we're going to do for the port work. My main suggestion though, if you're going to do some of this porting and stuff, just make sure you're not overlapping things. You know, just keep in mind when your piston's traveling, you want to make sure that things like your bridge ports aren't going to bleed through into your intake through a window or something whenever you're trying to crank your crankcase compression. So imagine this is a windowed piston. You're thinking that your intake, you know what I mean, your crankcase compression starts at the bottom here, but you got to remember that you're windowed. So you don't want things to bleed through the window into here and back to here or whatever. Try to keep things, you know, as uniform as possible, but I found that it's really not a big deal at all. I found that as long as you leave a bit of space between the intake port and whatever you're going to do over here, you don't typically really run into many issues. But it is possible if you try to go wild and crazy. You know, you don't want you don't want this to be so wide that you only have a hair of space holding it because you got a window there that's basically taking away half of what you thought you had available. You know what I mean? So just keep that stuff in mind and, you know, have fun with it. Don't be afraid to try a few cylinders. Buy these cheap ones and experiment. So, yeah. Now, whenever I talk about crankcase compression, I feel like I'm doing something wrong because, like, especially whenever I say like 40 degrees crankcase compression, the reason is because it depends. A lot of that depends on your position in the crankshaft or in the rotating assembly or whatever. So you'll find that as the piston travels up and down, the further you get around to, like, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the closer you get to 90 degrees, the more the piston will travel over a set, like, degrees of timing or whatever. Like, say you got 40 degrees of timing, but you're opening your intake at 70 degrees, you'll find that the distance the piston actually travels will be different than if you were running 40 degrees of crankcase compression and she was opening at 80 degrees. I've never actually sat down and really measured this stuff out, but I know some people have explained to me that this is the reason that we should really be careful when trying to port and just going off of the numbers. Like there's too much effort being put onto the numbers. It's because flow has, well, I mean, you're going to find more power with the flow than you will just by changing the numbers. You know what I mean? And one of the things you want to keep in consideration with your intake timing and looking at your crankcase compression and stuff is that the distance the piston will actually travel will change as you change those numbers. It's just kind of the way it works. I mean, the piston is moving at, I believe the piston's moving at its fastest at around 90 degrees, and it's at its slowest, at top dead center or at bottom dead center. And it just kind of depends on where it is through that rotation on how far the piston actually travels over a set number of degrees or something. That's kind of the way it was explained to me, but I've never really sat down and tried to figure it out. You know what I mean? But You know, you might find that it changes by 10 or 20 thousandths. You never know. I've never sat and tried to figure it out. So, you know, but that's one of the reasons that I feel like it's wrong to talk about. I really shouldn't say it's wrong, but I feel like we should be more thorough when talking about things like the crankcase compression and stuff, is because it kind of depends on where you are through the rotation, you know, because it could change. You might find that you're getting just as much travel at 35 degrees crankcase compression as what you were starting at 40 degrees of crankcase compression, just because of the where it changed, you know what I mean, with your numbers and everything, and where you are through the rotation of the crankshaft and everything. So, you know what I mean? So keep that in mind whenever you hear me talk about this stuff. You know, it's more about the actual distance the piston travels. Now, it did kind of tick me off about the piston, you know. I'm wondering if there might have been a flaw, because I didn't smack it that hard. All I did was, well, you know what? I wasn't holding on to the piston. I should have been holding on to the piston whenever I pulled the trigger on the impact, you know, and I wasn't, and it just, I bet you it was just the momentum that spun it around, and the connecting rod smacked her and popped that piece off. First time I've done that. I've never had that happen before, so there's a lesson learned. So this is one of the reasons I do not build for individuals. I still got stuff to learn, you know. I screw up enough stuff to know that I still got a ways to go until I learn everything. And I'd hate to do something like that on somebody's nice OEM, you know, top end or something. And that's kind of why I don't do it for people. I mean, I've done it for a few of my closest friends and stuff like that, but as far as like a customer base, I'm not at a point where I feel comfortable doing it, because I make mistakes. And I don't know. I could easily cost myself more money than what I'd be charging for the port work, or close to it. I mean, some of these top ends are $250 or more. And if I'm charging $300 for a port job, you know, a simple port job, well, there went, you know, everything. You know, I'm just not confident enough to do it, so that's why I don't do it. Maybe someday we'll pick up some customers, but as of right now, I'm not confident enough to feel like that I think I should be doing it or something. So, yeah. But anyway, there's the plan, and we'll have to see how she works out when the grinding starts. That's next. We're going to start doing some grinding on it. I'm just not going to finalize the numbers until I have the other piston. That's it. And it should probably be here. It's probably going to take 4 or 5 days yet until it gets here, I bet. I haven't got any. I ordered it 2 days ago or 3 days ago, and I still haven't got a tracking number. So I don't know. I don't know what's holding that up. Hopefully it gets here in time that we can finish this and try to take it to the races. But it's getting down to the wire. I don't have much time left, so we'll see how things progress. All right. I was going to make a grinding video, but I decided that this should be good enough. These are just a couple of pictures of the grinding process. I'm not done yet, but, you know, I think this is good enough that you get a good idea. Just, you know, well, there's the sandpaper that I used. Everything from 140 to 600 grit. That's just, you know, for the exhaust port, and you can see the 600 kind of polishes her out, you know, good enough for me at least. And then the transfer work, the weird transfer work I was explaining, this is what she looks like. So, hope you enjoyed. Catch you in the next one. Later.